Hey everyone, and welcome to World of Tanks 8.5 here as we take a look at some of the new features that are going to be in the game. First off, we have the new Russian light tree here, starting with the T60, the T70, and the T80, with progressively larger and larger cannons too, going from the multi-burst type round that you typically would see in a loads here, moving up to a 45mm and so on and so forth. So we'll go ahead and take a look at those when we get to the game, and in the meantime, in addition to the light tanks for the for the Soviets here, there's a few additions to the Germans as well, so we'll take a look at those real quick as well. So starting with the T60 here, we see it's a small little tank. It starts off with a 50 caliber machine gun and can move into some larger millimeter sized autocannons, but can also get the single shot 37mm here right off the bat. That's not a bad gun. It does have more penetration and more damage, but you drop your rapid fire in order to gain a single fire. So it depends on your playstyle and what you want to go for. So going on from there, we move into the T70 and we'll take a look at what that has to offer cannon-wise. In the T70, we see a progressive slight change in gun, all the way up from the 45 to the 37 that we previously saw in the T60 to the 45 again, which is more common in the T26, the T50, so on and so forth. This 45mm cannon has slightly more damage and more pen than the standard 45mm, and by all means you probably should have the majority of the stuff unlocked for this. And now we see here they can split both to the 76 tank destroyer and the T80 light. So we'll go ahead and move on to the T80 light and see what that tank has to offer over the T70. So with the final light here for the new Soviet stuff, we look at the T80. And as you can see, it's a speedy little tank that offers a different little bit of variety of 45mm and 37mm cannons here, and offering one exclusive 45mm only to be featured on the T80. All these cannons that are unlocked immediately are very similar to each other, slightly better penetration and damage as you progress up, except the 37 is just a better fire rate than the 45. And then there's the exclusive VT-43 here, which is only 1,000 points, so be sure to unlock it, is a better accuracy and better aim time than the 42. So it is a worthwhile upgrade, and only playing one game on a double on a premium account should unlock it, so it's not too hard to grind to it if you wanted to go that route. Let's go ahead and take a look at the German stuff that was just added in as well, and that features a new tier 10 and a whole new tree for the most part. Looking at the new German features to the game, we see a new little bit of a tree start to branch out here and there, starting off with the Panzer II-G, linking into the VK2001D. This is a new medium, and it takes place at the exact same tier as the Panzer III, and it leads to the 3-4 along with the Panzer III. So you do have two different routes to go, either the 3A or the 2G to get to there. And of course that leads to the same end result, so you could try both, see which one you prefer. We see that the 2801 goes into a light Panther, and then this tank is also in line with the standard Panther, but is assumed to be a little bit lighter, faster, and more in line with the Scout. Or a light support tank rather than a true Scout. It is the first light tank for the Germans up at the higher tiers in tier 7, and of course the 2801 getting bumped in the last patch to become a tier 6 from a tier 5. So it will be an interesting tank to see as it competes against such things as the T-71. In addition to that, we go into the Indian Panzer, which is a step up and in line with the Panther II and the VK4502A and the Tiger II. It is the second medium for the Germans, and is not too hard to reach as it's only 81,000 experience up from the 3002. And then from there we move into the Leopard, and then into the Leopard 1. The PTA into the 1, so we start to see some very high-end tanks as we get very close to that smooth bore sort of cutoff line that World of Tanks has imposed. So that adds a medium tier 10 line to complement the E50s already in the game. So let's go ahead and take a look at those individual tanks. The VK2001D does have a little bit of beefy armor up in the front, sitting in at a nice and lofty 50 meters on the hull, or 50mm rather than the hull, and 30 on the turret with the stock turret. Now, this does feature the very similar weapon systems to what you've already seen in the Panzer III and the Panzer IIIA, so it should come as no surprise as to what you're going to be able to use and what you're going to be able to utilize to battle your foes. So this one should come as no difference to what you've already played, and should just be a nice little compliment to have a heavier tier 4 than what you currently have been using and what you've been playing. We see a very interesting and unique tank here with the Light Panzer, or Light Panther rather, as it is a Panther chassis with a with a Leopard and a 2801 turret up on top. Now, it features the little light 5cm cannon that we're all used to seeing back on the light tanks, but it can upgrade to the 75mm, which we shouldn't be too surprised with, but it also features the 10.5 derp cannon, which we've all grown to love, that goes almost naturally onto the 2801, and in addition, features the Kanish gun, so it does offer a sniper role or very fast firing role if you were to sling HE or gold in that, or it offers the amazing 10.5 derp cannon that a lot of us have grown to love and can sling both HE and gold as well as AP. So a few different options, and it does feature a very, very exclusive beefy engine in this tier 9 900 horsepower engine, so you can only imagine how fast this thing is possible of going with the armor of a Panther. So this will be a very interesting tank, being a tier 7 light that has a very weak gun to start with, so this might be one you want to save up some free experience and burn that turret down so that you can equip either the 10.5 or the Kanish gun to help make it effective. Now once you upgrade to that giant engine, you're going to be flying. This will be a very fun one to check out and to try. Looking here at the tier 8 medium tank, the Indian Panzer. This one developed for the Indian Army by Germany but never implemented. It looks kind of like a miniature Low or Luva, so it's kind of interesting. It has a very steep piked front, so it has a very good gradient of slope, but very low armor. So it's kind of a pro and con there. And depending on what you go up against, you either can bounce a lot or it won't make a difference because of the either the high penetration rates of the 9s and 10s or the 6.7s will just deflect right off of it. So it's a really interesting tank, and it's the first to include a unique caliber to the German line, the 9cm or 90mm for the American players here. We see this in the first time here in the Indian Panzer, and it really offers no damage benefit over the 88mm, but offers a much better aim time and much better penetration rate. So, a very good lead-in into the new Leopard line. We'll go ahead and take a look at what else is offered here. Taking a look at the Panther Leopard Prototype A here, we see that the hull armor and the turret armor aren't too fancy, nothing spectacular over what we just came from, but it does offer a very good degree of slope and a rounded turret, something that is new to the German lines, typically only reserved for Soviets and Americans. So we start to get into the conical turrets, and we see that that actually increases our ability to bounce shells off the turret. So maybe this thing will offer some advantages in that case. Now, as we see here, it has the 90mm or 9cm cannon that we've grown to love with the intermediate Panzer behind us, and it does feature a 105 Royal Ordnance gun. So we're starting to get into the late German division of armor, so we're talking into the 50s and 60s here in terms of their production, well past World War II. So, as we take a look at it, it does have a very moderately slow fire rate, nothing too spectacular, should be about in line with normal mediums, but the accuracy is decent, aim time is a little long in my opinion, but the damage and the penetration are pretty good. So, on top of the fact that this thing does offer a beefy engine as well, it can go pretty fast, so we'll be able to see this thing be able to be used as a pushing and flanking tank in addition to a few other uses. We'll have to experiment with it and see what else we can think of it. So we move on to the infamous Leopard 1 as the tier 10 offerings for the Germans. Let's take a look at that one, shall we? The Leopard 1, the pinnacle of German engineering in this game at the moment. We see that it does feature the conical turret, very similar to the Leopard Prototype A, as it is, of course, the final acquisition you can make on that tank, in addition to all the other final acquisitions. You'll see that it just offers a little bit better slope of armor, nothing too spectacular, so this tank really is a fast, mobile, agile tank by the stats. Of course, that can play out differently in games, but just by looking at the stats, we see that its armor value is not nearly as high as the E50M, but we notice that its speed is really where it relies on, in addition to the slope of its armor. So, in practicality, this thing might be a great pushing tank, one of those frontline tanks that you see go out there and start wailing on the enemy before they get close and return back to base and join the rest of the herd. So, while not exactly a scout tank or not a Bat-Chat, I can see this thing doing pretty well in the front lines. We're going to have to go test out that theory. Of course, as I said before, the 10.5 is offering some pretty good damage, but its aim time's a little low, so this might be one of those tanks where buying the stabilizer or the V-stab is your best bet, and then just running and gunning that way, seeing what you can do. So, this being a fast medium, it's going to be a very fun one. Anyway, let's start looking at these tanks in-game, shall we? I'm going to skip the T60 light tier 2 tank for right now, and I'll get back to that later. Instead, we'll hop right into the T70, the light tank at tier 3. It really is about the same as any other. It does offer a few different rapid fire options in addition to a long barrel option. I much prefer the long barrel option as it does give you a little bit more control. This thing is not as fast as some of the other tanks you might see at tier 3, and it really is kind of in line with the T26. So it really does work well as a sniper. It can be used pretty well in that circumstance. It doesn't have much in the way of armor, but then again, it was a very limited sort of sample size that I had to play with here. So it kind of worked out that I was able to just get up close and start shooting through weak points on the tank, but otherwise I really didn't get much experience. Otherwise, I just know this thing might be better off at a little bit further distance than right up in front of people. The T-80, the tier 4 light tank of the Russians, is not as fast as I had originally thought it would be. It was a little bit different, but I am not going to argue with it. It does feature a few, again, different options in terms of its cannons, the rapid fire options, which I didn't select, but did see some people using, but I primarily expected them to be using gold when they were throwing out the rapid fire cannons. So I went ahead and went with the top tier, the unique cannon for this T-80, and found that it was very accurate and very decent at penetrating tanks, even a much higher tier than the ones I was using, and I was able to use it fairly effectively. While not exactly my most favorite tank, it does kind of fit in line, and with the A20, it gives you a little bit better option than the A20. I still cannot seem to find that thing to be too prevalent. I did much prefer this tank instead, but it does offer a little bit more harsher matchmaking, that is the forewarning. So, while it's no T-34 that it leads into, it is a nice option to give you a break from the A20, which you are normally stuck with. Now we take a look at the German lines here. We look at the VK2001D. It is the tier 4 main tank. It's a medium, and it does sit right in line with the Panzer III. Personally, I find it to be a little more effective than the Panzer III. It does offer some more armor than what the Panzer III does, but at the cost of speed. And in addition, you'll notice that I am not using the 7.5. That is a very misleading cannon, because not only does it offer lower penetration, it offers a slower fire rate. So that first shot, if it doesn't pin, you're not going to do that higher damage and you're not going to get a quicker reload. So by and large, using the longer 5cm was the way to go, as it offered a much higher fire rate, a much better penetration, and then the damage kind of works itself out, because obviously if you're not penetrating, you're not doing damage. That's kind of why I decided to go with the 5cm. I find that to be my recommended gun for this tank. Otherwise, you might have to do a little bit of work to get the 7.5 to be effective. Otherwise, this is exactly the tank I recommend. Do not go with the 7.5. It is a red herring, but to each their own. Your mileage may vary. Maybe you'll do better with it than I did. So, we're going to go ahead and look at the next tier. Jumping up quite a few tiers, we take a look at the Light Panther, or the Reconnaissance Panther, whichever way you want to take a look at it. It is a Panther chassis with a gigantic engine, so it moves fantastically fast, and it does offer quite a bit of protection if you were to get in the proper tiering, but as a tier 7 light tank, you might see quite a few tier 9s, possibly even a tier 10 due to the current matchmaking system, so be warned of that. You might want to load some gold into this thing, but as we take a look at it, it actually has the two tiny turrets on it, which are pretty interesting to see, but that was because of its history. It was developed to be a reconnaissance tank to operate in the heavily wooded areas, and so it didn't want a gun that extended past the turret, or the chassis of the tank itself, so that it never got caught up on anything or broken or bent out of shape whenever it hit a tree. And so, because of that, the only two major options that I'm going to recommend, the 10.5 derp cannon and the Kanish gun, are tiny and fit within the size of the chassis, and of course the two turrets are the only things that kind of make that work. So I personally enjoyed using the 10.5. It basically makes you a 2801 with a little bit more speed, a little bit more survivability, and a crap ton of more ammunition. So beyond that though, I seem to have some pretty good use out of the Kanish gun, but out of the two, I mean, they can go either way. Either way, if you're going to go with the Kanish, I do highly recommend you load gold exclusively. Otherwise, I do not foresee the HE and that really working out too well. As for the 10.5 derp cannon, I recommend a good split between gold and HE, because you never know what you're going to come up against. And I was able to use the HE pretty effectively in the matches I was in, but there are opportunities where gold may be needed if you cannot get around to a flank, or your HE is just not cutting it, or it's something that you want to do full damage to, but the HE won't go through, but the AP gold will. So just a few little recommendations, but do enjoy this tank. Make sure that you are not a scout. That is something primarily that needs to get across right now. It is not a scout tank, it is a light assault tank and light reconnaissance tank. So you're going to be used in sort of a fashion where you're going to be used as a flanker. So as you see in my video here, when I'm in the city, I push around to the sides of tanks rather than go headlong at them. That is the thing that this tank needs to do. So with that, we're going to go ahead and look at the nasty tier 8s. Easily my favorite addition in this new patch is the Indian Panzer. It is as I mentioned before, a tank that was developed for the Indian Army but never put into service due to its complications and simply ending up not being a winning design. It is very, very similar to the Luva from what I found and what I experienced. It is a little bit faster, so I'd say it's a medium version, and those are air quotes I just had there, medium version of the Luva. And I found that the gun is actually, the 90mm is fantastic. It is a very quick rate of fire, good aim, great penetration, and the damage is nothing to shy away from either. You're doing a pretty good chunk of damage, 350 on average I believe it was, but you're penetrating something fierce. You're going right through most tanks' armors, and even if you don't, the one that you do go through is gonna scare them off. And it does fire fast enough and can relocate fast enough that it's a very effective medium tank. And I did enjoy the Luva when I play it, and so I'd really enjoy this tank, and I do recommend this above all others. Now, when compared to the other mediums in its line, the Panther II, I haven't really experienced it yet, so I can't say comparatively, but from experience going against them, it seems that the Panther line, as opposed to the Leopard line, has a little more armor, but I'll touch upon that when I get to the higher tiers in this line. Instead, I'll go ahead and say that this tank was great. The only experiences I had that were negative were that I can see that the 10s and 9s and anyone else I was facing was probably throwing gold, because I should have bounced a few of those rounds off the front of this tank, but it really didn't turn out that way. This thing does have a very extreme slope right off the front, so I would expect in normal tier 7s and 8s, there's a very good chance that it's going to deflect right off the front if you face dead on, and they will have a tough time going through. Even the lower glacial, as that thing also has a very nice slope to it, but the top plate definitely has a really nice slope to it, so I wouldn't be worried too much about getting shells going right through the front. You'll only see that in 9s and people using gold rounds. That will be almost a guarantee to go right through the front. As far as angling it, that'll definitely help it, of course, but those tracks are a little bit on the big side and they might take damage to the drive sprocket. So, just a little bit of word of advice there, but again, this one was easily my favorite addition to the new patch, and I'm probably going to have to try and pick this thing up. The Leopard 1 Prototype A, I don't think it actually has the 1 in its name, but it definitely has the Prototype A in there, is an interesting little tank. It is very fast for a medium, I guess, compared to the E50, because they drop a lot of the armor off the E50 and when you compare the two to make the Leopard. So you're sacrificing armor for speed, and in addition, the turret on this thing can turn very, very fast, so you do not have to worry about being flanked beyond your ability to turn, nor have to worry about turning your hull if you have to, if someone keeps circling you. The turret is very fast, circling shy of 50 degrees a minute or second, either which way. But anyway, it is very fast turning, so you can quickly snap onto targets, or you can keep on the move and keep rotating around people, not have to worry about your turret lagging behind you when you're trying to aim and fire. And in addition, the cannon on it is quite nice. It does offer a very good rate of fire, very decent penetration rate, and of course a very decent damage rate. Of course these are coming from the tier 10 option, but the 90mm that you take from the Indian Panther beforehand, or Indian Panzer beforehand, is not a bad option either until you get to the tier 10 gun. Either which way, it is a very nice tier 9. I don't want to say it's compared to the E50 at all, because you have to really look at it as the E50 offers you armor and the PTA offers you speed. So it depends on which route you want to go. They both are great sniping platforms, great long-range platforms, very accurate in their own sense, but it appears as though the PTA is more of a quick response sort of tank. It does not have the armor or the standoff ability that the E50 does, so you do not want to get into headlong engagements. You'd rather support somebody else and let them be the meat shield and you sit there and deal damage from behind. Or you want to be able to quickly go from flank to flank and help out as needed. You don't want to sit there and engage for too long, otherwise this thing will not be able to stand up. Compared to any other tank in the game, I'd say kind of is very similar to the Patton, if you want to call it that way. It looks like the Leopard line is very similar to the Patton. So if you have experience with the Patton and you make that work for you, you'll probably find that the Leopard works just as well. Just it does not have very good armor on the turret. As much as you thought that the spherical turret's going to help, it really doesn't. But then again, people could be slinging gold, so your mileage may vary. Of course, the test server, a lot of people do seem to do that. But otherwise, I did find this tank to be pretty decent in its right, but the only thing that the Patton has over it, above all others, is the gun depression. The tank here kind of doesn't have much in the way of gun depression, but that's to be expected from the German line. Finally here, we take a look at the Tier 10. It is going to be the Leopard 1. It is a medium tank and is in line with the E50M. Now, again, as I stated previously, that the Leopard seems to drop the armor that the E50 has and instead gains speed. And so with that, I really have found that the Leopard line, the PTA and the Leopard 1 are... I didn't like them so much because I prefer a little bit more armor with the German tanks. That's how I find that the German line is supposed to be, and so I would find myself getting into standoff positions where I'd be taking hits where I shouldn't, and that was of course because I expected it to have a little bit better armor, and of course it did not, and or people could be throwing gold because it is the test server again, so your mileage may vary yet again. But besides that, I did like it in the fact that it did offer quite a bit of speed. So I was able to relocate place to place as needed. This is what would be considered a quick response tank. If there's a flank failing, you would be the one to quickly go reposition yourself to go and assist them. You don't want to stay in your engagement if you can go and help out the other flank. This tank is absolutely perfect for that aspect. If someone's calling for help, this is the tank that can go to them and help them. This is a tank for flanking, a tank for sniping, a tank for assisting. This is not a tank like the E50M where you can take shots off the front because you have that decent armor and decent slope that you can then angle and deflect shells all day long. While you actually do have the ability to deflect shells and you do have somewhat decent slope, I wouldn't count on it so much because the armor values are so low on the Leopard line. But otherwise, the cannon is phenomenal, so you're going to be doing a consistent amount of damage. The penetration is very excellent, even with standard rounds and firing at different angles of different tanks. I was able to go through a very good majority, dealing about 3,000 damage per game that I was playing in both the Leopard 1 and the PTA. So take your pick as to what you really want to do with it, but my personal recommendation is that it is going to be used as I said, a flanker or a quick response tank. Do not use it as a standoff tank. You'll find yourself getting killed a little too quickly. Now, that being said, you can of course support other tanks, like if you have a T110E4 hanging around and you want to help him out, by all means, let him take the shots and you kind of poke out around him, shoot, pull back, things like that. You really cannot take a hit in this thing, and again, the spherical turret kind of is a red herring in the sense that it makes you think that it's going to deflect more shells than it will, but I noticed that I had my turret get shot through every time that I was shot at, and they would end up landing on the turret. And it, again, that could be because of gold, but I found that it really didn't offer much in the way of an ability to sit behind a hill and just have the turret poke up like you would with a Patton. So while it is very similar to the Patton, it does lack that turret armor and the gun depression that the Patton series does offer, but it does have the speed and a good consistent damage, good fantastic accuracy as to be expected with the German line as always. So with that, that'll wrap up my review of the tanks. I just have to cover the T60 here that I was not able to touch on in the videos. Alright, so I'm going to try and do something here in my Chrome browser and try and show you guys the patch notes. I want to see if this actually comes out. And also say that I was unable to get any games in the T60 just because of the sample size on the server. I was unable to get any games, there's nothing I can do about that. So all I can do is recommend that you give it a shot. It's not going to be too long in that tank because it is a tier 2. You will fly through it after like a handful of games. Anyway, they're going to add in a few premiums. In addition to the ones that you see here, those are available for the super testers only. You'll be able to get the Sexton, the SPG, which is a fantastic premium. Or no, it's a US premium. I thought it was going to be British. No, it says right here, sorry, that it will be moved to the British tree and added to the in-game shop. So it'll be it's a nice tier 3. I noticed that it was very derpy. It's very fast rate of fire. It's about a 4-second reload from what I was able to calculate. So needless to say, it's fantastic. So we'll work our way from the top to the bottom before we go anywhere else. We have the inclusion of the new tanks here, nothing new from beyond the normal. Few tanks here from the super testers. New map added, Pearl River, which is basically a mountain in between you and the enemy base, and it is very tight quarters if you wanted to really measure the size of it. So otherwise, the Siegfried Light South Coast and Malinovka had their maps updated. Some minor changes and improvements were made to Redshire, El Haluf, Karelia, Sand River, Steeps, Himmelsdorf, and Live Oaks. So I'd love to see what those are, but I'm sure you won't even notice that they were done. Gameplay changes, you see that the premium consumables are now available for the credit translation of gold, so it's like 4,000 per 1 gold. So it's really nice that they're going to be able to have those for purchase. The creation of platoons is now available for non-premium members, up to 3 players as normal. Same with tank companies, now non-premium members can do that. And the reduce the camo and emblems and inscription costs for the credit line. Otherwise than that, they added new inscriptions, new, what else? Ooh, inscription resolution size was increased. Okay, so it's easier to see. And new matchmaking rules to help balance out scouts for the teams. Oh, that'll be nice to see once I can get my hands on that data. Maybe they'll actually make it so that your scouts can only see 3 or 2 tiers above them as opposed to 4. That would be fantastic if that was an option. Beyond that, tanks changed. I already mentioned the Sexton. The gun depression has been updated for the E4. That's a premium. The visual models have been changed for a bunch of tanks. The important thing here is that the IS-7 has had its speed increased almost 10 kilometers. So that IS-7 is going to be pretty gnarly, the fact that it can now go upwards of 60 kilometers an hour. So that's going to be very, very different. Also, the velocity of all shells of the 17 centimeter is increased by about 75 meters per second, so it's really going to help for the artillery pieces, and I believe the 17 centimeters also on the JP E100. I could be wrong about that one, but either which way, that is going to be fantastic. Gives you a little bit better response time for your shells, as opposed to them taking forever at long ranges. And the fixes for the collision models to the Jagdpanzer 1 and the Jagdpanzer E100. Wow, talk about tier 1 and a tier 10. Other minor fixes are just as you see here. You can pause that and read that if you want, or you can always go to the World of Tanks /news website, and they will have the test server notes on there. So I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode of my preview of 8.5. I'm sorry it took so long to get out to you guys, but the test servers sadly were misbehaving and not allowing me to get on top of a bunch of other stuff going on. I couldn't seem to connect to it, but I was finally able to get it all done, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you would not mind leaving a comment or a like or even subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate it. And I can't wait to get this patch out there, and I can't wait for you guys to tell me what you think of it. Alright, I will see you all in game, and thank you once again.